What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. I think by the time this is published, it might be episode number 43 or 44, which is just absolutely amazing to me. So I'm very proud. Like always, the J. David Group is sponsoring this podcast, which of course is my company. My company helps high-growth software companies recruit top software sales leaders and salespeople. Go to the jdavidgroup.com/hiring to learn more, or go to the jdavidgroup.com/looking if you're ready for your next big challenge. Now, my guest today is Gregg Carman. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Humanyze, which provides people, analytics, and application software that helps companies improve organizational effectiveness and health. Gregg, welcome to Over Quota.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So let's start with what I just ended with, as always, which is tell us a little bit about Humanyze, its value proposition, and your role there as CRO.
Happy to. So at Humanyze, we developed at MIT a one-of-a-kind set of analytics libraries that help organizations improve their organizational effectiveness, which we all know is a critical component and driver of financial performance. So we devised a private, secure, and anonymous way to analyze existing corporate data sets to be able to measure this organizational effectiveness through our proprietary score called the Humanyze Organizational Health Score. And it's used by our clients to be able to take the 45 indicators, metrics, and benchmarks from this organizational health score to determine the impact that their HR, workplace, operational, or digital transformation initiatives are having on their business. So it's a set of leading indicators that allow you to know that when we're making change in the organization, are the behaviors we're seeking to get to those changes, are they actually occurring? And when they're not, you can understand where the laggards are in the organization. You can intervene so that you can improve overall performance.
Let me just ask a follow-up question before you go
sure.
on to the CRO. When you say data, two things: define organizational effectiveness for me, and give me a couple of data sets that you will use in order to help companies.
So I'll answer the latter first. Those data sets are the digital breadcrumbs left behind from communication systems like email, calendar, and messaging, or enterprise applications like Salesforce or Workday or GitHub, or even smart building IoT sensors that are aware of location and utilization and mobility in an office. So examples of organizational effectiveness really come into three categories. Employee engagement. Are there behaviors that indicate that employees are engaged and are not attrition risk? For example, what's the typical workday like? Are we overworking our team? What's the typical weekend work like? Are we working them too much on the weekends? Do they even get time with their direct supervisor or not? The second category is team productivity. We're not measuring productive output, we're measuring those behaviors that lead to productivity, such as meeting culture, such as alignment within an organization, or a real common thing that's hard to measure that we measure for all of our clients is what's called cross-level bridging. And this is when you're not just communicating with your supervisor, but above your supervisor, and vice versa. You're not just communicating with your direct reports, you're communicating down to the bottom of the organization. It's an indication of alignment and efficiency. And then the third category is organizational adaptability. We're unaware of any technology out there that measures this ability to receive change in the organization and adapt to it. So are you a rigid organization, or are you a flexible, adaptable organization? And being able to understand that before and during change allows you to understand which parts of our organization are naturally rigid. Maybe we're going to have a different approach for introducing change to them than for the parts of the organization that are naturally flexible and adaptable. So those three areas, engagement, productivity, and adaptability, round out our organizational health score that serves as a proxy for effectiveness. And if you can change these things, we have 12 years of data, more than 6 billion workplace interactions that we've analyzed in that time period. We know that organizational effectiveness lifts, and we know that financial performance lifts.
That's what I was going to ask that as well. Is that what is the ROI? In other words, how do you tie that back to ROI? But that's how you tie it back, because you can see it when you have the effectiveness across all of those areas.
Yes, in fact, we have across those 45 measures, we have 9 leading indicators, and each one has an ROI that's specific. That's not determined by us. These are determined by third-party research, but an ROI that's tied directly to revenue lift, asset utilization, risk mitigation, or cost savings, explicit cost savings.
Very interesting. Just one other question there, because this to me is fascinating. You mentioned cross-level bridging. I thought, given what you and I talked about previously when we first met, in terms of, and we'll get into that in a minute, but in terms of your belief in the effectiveness of having an integrated go-to-market strategy. When you said cross-level bridging, I thought you were going to say also cross-functional. So in other words, it goes from sales to customer success to products or whatever. But you're talking up and down. Or can it work side to side as well?
We measure both.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so we call that cross-team bridging. But yeah, the cross-level bridging is just the top down, bottom down, top up, or bottom up, top down. And then cross team is just side to side motion. And we actually have one of our measures is actually knowledge transfer speed that combines the best of those and puts it into one index so that you understand when I introduce information into the organization, how quickly does it get distributed?
Right. Oh, so interesting. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Tell me about your role as the Chief Revenue Officer and what that means.
So I think it's important to know that I've always gone by the title that has not explicitly been Chief Revenue Officer. I go by the fancy long title of Executive Vice President and Head of Global Commercial Operations, which our Global Commercial Operations team is the CRO function. It's sales, marketing, solutions architects, customer success, and partnership ecosystem. So all of those all the customer facing teams in the organization. And I've had that role for nearly 4 years now. And when I joined, there was no one serving any of the functions within that framework. And people were doing, they were researchers by nature, or they were subject matter experts by nature, but they were doing part-time trying to grow the business. They were doing part-time trying to market. So I built the team from the bottom up.
Let me ask you, I want to talk about the building of the team, actually, that's interesting in and of itself. But when you have so many responsibilities and so many functions that are rolling up to you, how do you prioritize where you're spending your time on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? How do you know, okay, this needs my time now, this team or this manager needs my time now, this is something I really need to focus on now, and I can put this off for later? How do you do that?
Well, it's a really good question, because I think it's a challenge for anybody in a management or a leadership position, which is fundamentally, where do I prioritize my time and attention? And furthermore, it balances with, am I spending so much time with a particular part of the organization that it's to the detriment of the performance of the rest of the organization? So you try to balance those two parts. I find that the best method for me is threefold. One, data and KPIs. Who's trending improvements, who's trending a decline in performance. And when I say who, I mean not just individuals, but teams as well. And then I combine that with regular interaction with my direct reports, both in a structured manner, with weekly staff meetings, to make sure we're getting the work done, but also with monthly and quarterly check-ins, like, are we doing the right things? By having that finger on the pulse with the group, I know if the group is aligned, and the group also, just some of the wisdom of crowds, we're able to self-regulate where prioritization needs to occur. And then the last is just one-on-one interaction with my direct reports, because oftentimes if you lead with, where can I help? How can I help? You will get a sense, if you are really good at hiring, if you're fortunate that the people you hire are able to perform to the level that you hired them to perform to, and they're able to communicate with you in a manner, leading with those questions that are always about helping. As a leader, we're helping. We're there to serve. We're not there to command. This is a little bit different. And I think that your teammates, your direct reports will give you an indication where they need help. But it has to come from a real sincere culture point of view, that if you ask that once a month, they may not open up. If that's just part of your work relationship with your teammates, they know that it's sincere, it's authentic, and they know that when they actually ask for help, if you deliver it and you deliver it with high quality, they know that you're a good place to go to hit the red button and say, I need some assistance. But I do it through those three methods: data, regular group discussions that have a purpose, and then the last part is just regular one-on-ones that are meant to be a service one-on-one, not a tell me everything you've done since the last time we talked one-on-one.
Yep, that makes sense. You mentioned building the team essentially from the ground up. Obviously that was something that they struggled with to begin with, which is that they didn't have any functional leaders in the major areas of the company, of course. Was that something that they essentially recruited you to do? They knew that, and they were like, okay, we need a grown-up here to figure this out and to organize our go-to-market strategy? Or was it something that they hired you and said, we need someone to head up our customer-facing roles, and then you just sort of took it from there? What was the
it was more the former, with one exception. I don't think they said we needed a grown-up. I mean, these are MIT scientists who are brilliant in their own right. I think they definitely looked at it like, our strength is creation and innovation and science-based rigor, and our strength and experience is not in building a go-to-market strategy. It's not in hiring a go-to-market team. It's not in designing that team, and it's not in selling and marketing and servicing customers. So we really need somebody who can not only roll up his or her sleeves, but somebody who can design that and lead that and be a good partner of ours.
When you start, so you mentioned, obviously, you said if you're lucky enough to hire good people who can do what you expect them to do, how did you go about recruiting and hiring the right people? And I know one of the things that you're very focused on, of course, is making sure you're hiring people that are coachable. Tell me a little bit about what, as you started to hire, what were some of the people that you hired first in terms of function, and then how are you able to screen for coachability?
Well, I think in the first 2 to 3 months, I brought in a couple people who were doing it on a part-time basis. I brought them in for a full-time temporary basis. Hey, you need to take on this job, this function especially in customer success, full-time, but I think it's temporary. All right. I can't have you dabble here and in product and in engineering. It's got to be here. Secondly, for all of us, myself included, the acknowledgement that we were all going to wear 3 or 4 hats for the next 90 days. But for me, that meant I would understand firsthand what it was going to take. So I had firsthand exposure to how badly do we need, salespeople in the field, and what kind of profile should they be? Should they have an enterprise experience, a small medium business experience? Should they have a technical background, or should they have a business background? The second thing was understanding, the need or the impact and the skill set, so the demand on marketing that we needed. And then the third was understanding, what was the level of interaction with customers that we needed, and therefore what kind of customer success team do we need to build. So I had firsthand exposure to it, and I was able to prioritize it. And for us, prioritization meant we needed marketing right away. We needed to be able to have a consistent message. We needed to be able to build a pipeline consistently and predictably. Otherwise, there was no need to invest in salespeople. And then the second thing was understanding that we had some very large enterprises as customers that demanded and expected a lot of direct interaction and engagement with their customer success team, and being able to build properly around that framework. We also identified that partnerships were going to be a really strategic component of any go-to-market design. So being able to understand firsthand what kind of partnership team do we need to build. So that's how we prioritize it. Firsthand feedback. And then slowly over 6 months after I joined, all of us quit taking on 3 and 4 responsibilities and eventually got down to 1 or 1.5 types of responsibilities. So that's how we made that determination at Humanyze.
And how much of that was data informed? You say it was feedback. Feedback from where? How did that?
Well,
mm-hmm.
I think it's really, there's very specific data on the pipeline that was needed and the pipeline that was actually being generated. And therefore understanding that if we spent a little bit more in marketing, we should be able to reliably add to the pipeline. The second piece of data that was very informative was the actual amount of time and the type of work that was being required of our customer success team in direct engagement with our large customers, and being able to understand that how would that work as we added customers, or as we expanded at those big customers, what would that mean in terms of a demand on headcount growth? Because there are only so many hours in a week. We need to make sure that we have enough staff to be able to support that, those needs and those expectations by customers. So those were the data points that fed us. We had data on what was the pipeline today, what was it being generated at what rate, and where did we need to be? And then we also had data on what was the work effort that was required in engaging with our customers, how did that translate into an FTE time, and then how many full-time equivalents would we need on a customer success team to be able to properly support our customers.
How did you make the determination, or which determination did you make as it pertains to the sales folks? Was it enterprise people that you need first? What was it, mid-market, SMB? Give me a sense of that.
So we settled on the initial go-to-market, the target customers being large enterprises. So companies with more than 5,000 employees. We also settled on the target buyers being chief operating officers and or chief human resources officers. So we knew from experience that there were certain job experiences, certain application solutions that we looked for in the background of any enterprise salesperson, because we knew that they knew how to sell to those buyers. We knew that they knew how to sell into the market. We knew that they knew how to sell that scale. And then of course, we also looked for salespeople that had experience in a startup environment where they knew sort of the pressures and sort of the expectations and the need to be self-reliant in a startup that might be different than when you're at an organization with 500 or 1,000 employees to rely on.
How did you make the sell to new hires, if you will, right? Where Humanyze, just going to market, growing, maybe certainly not a brand name at the time. What was the pitch? How did you attract the right people? Well,
I think that before you can attract the right people, you have to have a message that you're going to share. What is the message? And the metaphor I use to get people rallied around this is when you're developing a go-to-market team, a team that serves different points of time in a customer journey, from marketing when you're very early, to trying to get them to commit to get started in selling, to onboarding technically, to getting the customer to realize real value and capture that value in customer success, and then full circle back to sales, working with the customer to buy more. We're all part, the metaphor I use is we're all part of a movie or a play that we're putting on, and each one of us plays a part. What's important is that we all understand our part and our lines, because in any movie or play, you want people to be reading from the same script. If they're not, then the movie is not going to make any sense. It's going to be horrible. The people are going to be in the wrong parts and be like, I don't know why he was in that role. It doesn't make any sense. And when messaging across a go-to-market set of teams doesn't make any sense, it's obvious to investors, it's obvious to prospective customers, but it's also obvious to prospective employees. So the first thing is getting everybody bought into a message, that go-to-market framework, that movie script that this is the movie we're putting on for the next couple of years. And that's really important. Then how do you convince these prospective job candidates? It comes down to, this is the message, this is the movie we're putting on. If you are inclined to be interested in this, now let me share with you my leadership principles. And if you live within these leadership principles, you'll have an enjoyable time here. Bias for action, an obsession for the customer, demanding the highest quality standards, always wanting to learn more and to get better. These leadership principles that I apply to finding the right mix of people, but also that I expect people on the team to buy into. I think it's really important, because when you combine a message with a set of leadership principles, you reduce the amount of surprises for everybody involved.
Makes sense. Speaking of everybody playing a role, I would imagine as well that as you're recruiting people and moving them through the process, that you're playing your role, the other members of the leadership team are playing their role, right? It's the same whether you're within the company, helping customers on their customer journey and making sure that everybody cross-functionally is working together and everything is integrated, but then also during the recruitment process as well, making sure that each person that they meet on the team has their part in their role in bringing on the best people.
That's exactly right. And part of teamwork is trusting your teammates to do their part.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are going through the interview process, and when you're orchestrating that and being able to share with somebody on the leadership team or somebody on your team, this is the role I need you to play, this is what I need you to vet for, it needs to be reciprocal. The individual that you're coaching, that you're making that request of, needs to trust that makes sense, and I understand my part, and I'm going to vet for those things. I'm really going to do my part. And what comes out of this is teamwork as it's truly defined, which is built on trust. And that's what comes out of all this.
You mentioned bias for action is one of your leadership principles. Define that for me. When you say bias for action, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think we all know it when it's not there. An indecisive leader, an indecisive manager, an indecisive organization is one that I've rarely seen be successful. I've rarely seen it be extraordinary. I've rarely seen it be a rewarding place to work for those involved. So it's important for me, when I'm working with people, for them to know that I have a bias for action.
So
and that doesn't, oh, please go ahead.
No, so does that mean, as you're looking at data, because I know you're data driven, as you're looking at data and you're looking at information, you're looking at certain things to help you make your decision, is there a situation where, how do you make the right choices, make them so that there's no analysis paralysis, I guess, if you will, and then that you are acting on whatever needs to be acted on? How does that manifest itself, that thought process? Yeah.
Well, I think that it's really important for all of us, not just those in business, to realize that we can't be perfect, and to just exhibit excellence. And what's the difference between excellence and perfection? And excellence is you make a decision based upon the constraints of time and resources presented to you. And if you make a mistake, you correct it, again, through a bias for action. If it's working and you just put your toe in the water, but it's working, know that it's working, and now jump all the way into the pool. So bias for action should not be confused with be whimsical and be sloppy. A bias for action should mean do the best you can to make decisions based on the constraints presented to you, both in the form of resources and time. I'll tell you, there was a coach, UCLA. He won, I don't know how many consecutive NCAA championships in the 60s and 70s, but John Wooten used to say to his teammates, hurry up, but don't rush. And that's the essence of my principle on bias for action.
Yep,
we can all get that, hurry up, but don't rush. And that gets to this essence of bias for action.
Let's go back to coachabilities for a moment. First of all, what's your approach to coaching? And we talked about it a little bit in terms of the data and the group discussions and those types of things, but how do you, when you're in the coaching box, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. What does that look like for you? And then also, because it's important, how do you know when you have someone sitting across from you during an interview, let's just say, that is, in your opinion, coachable?
So one of the hardest things for me throughout my career is when I miss a candidate and hire him or her, but I miss the fact that they're not readily coachable. And why is that so important? You know, sometimes coachability gets mixed into the metaphor of you have to buy into sports. Let's expand on what coachability means from my perspective, which is the ability to provide criticism and offer opportunities for improvement. They have to come together. They have to come together. If they don't, it's just criticism. If they don't, it's just empty praise. They have to come together, which is, I noticed that you didn't do X, Y, or Z. And I think if you try to change X, Y, or Z with the following techniques, you may experience a different result. It has to come together. So what I do is I look for coachability for all types of candidates. I'll ask them to explain what they're doing today in their career. Just explain the company you work for. And I'll often then provide some observations. You know, it's interesting that you say that. I wonder if you switched out some of these words, if it would come across differently. What do you think? And the interesting thing, what I found is everybody gets kind of a little bit uncomfortable when asked that question. They're like, okay, I'm not here to sell my current company. I'm not here to tell you about the virtues of my current company. I don't know why you're asking me. So they always get a little bit sloppy in their reply. It's just human nature, caught off guard. You're asking me about a company I'm at. I don't want to be at that company. I want to be at your company. And then there's always opportunity for a little bit of coaching, but their reaction to that informs you if they're coachable. It informs you in a big way if they're coachable. If there's anything besides a positive response, then it's worth drilling down in the interview. It's worth drilling down deeper, because maybe you caught them off guard, and with the second attempt, you realize they're actually coachable, or maybe they're really not coachable. Maybe they're rigid and inflexible. Maybe they feel entitled that you really shouldn't be providing that because you don't work at that company. So how could you know what the right thing to say is?
What percentage of people do you meet and go through that exercise respond favorably?
Immediately respond favorably, more than 50%.
Okay.
After some drilling down, it's closer to 2/3 respond favorably. Okay. Look, some people just may be really experienced and really qualified for the job, but they may not be ready for the next job yet. So it's not just being inflexible, it just might be where you're at in life at that moment. But it's really important to know that I need people that are coachable. And then it leads to your second question, which is around when you're in that coaching box. I think it's important that the ability to offer help is very much challenged unless you can offer critical observations.
Define that.
How can I help a teenager learn how to drive better unless I inform him of the things that he could do better through my own critical observation? You should turn on the blinker before you make a turn. You might want to apply the brakes a little bit sooner because you're slamming on the brakes. When you're doing parallel parking, if I were you, I would stop and make sure you're lined up properly before you do it. It makes it easier. It's the critical observation. How can you offer help in the absence of critical observation? But that means that you have to be present. So when you're in the coaching box, you must be present. And you must actually like be aware of what it is you provide. Like if you are not present, if you're multitasking, you might as well just not give it, because you're actually showing a disrespect for the time for your teammate that needs some help. And you might as well just not give, you're actually causing more damage too. You got to be present. And I think that that's really important. Be present, therefore you can offer real critical observations, but don't offer them in the absence of real recommendations.
Let me ask you this, and this is pertinent given the time that we're in terms of more sales teams are fully distributed. And even before this pandemic and shelter in place, there are plenty of field salespeople that aren't necessarily in the office, and even when they're not in the office, maybe they're in front of customers and so forth. And you mentioned critical observation, and watching let's say someone drive a car and noticing that they didn't turn on the blinker is one thing, but when you're not next to each other, how do you do that? How can you offer critical observation in a way that obviously is reliable and helpful in a way that not just that doesn't just sound like criticism because you see something in Salesforce?
Yeah. Well, I think depending on the job function, the cadence. Let me take a step back. The cadence with which you're regularly interacting with people is important, but it's also relevant to their job function. So, for example, a first-line sales manager who has a team of 6 salespeople, she should be talking with her sales team members daily in some form of interaction. Sometimes it's a 1-minute call, sometimes it's a 31-minute call, but there should be that regular interaction. That's what the sales team members, I've noticed, the best first-line sales managers, they do that. They do that, and what happens is there's a regular discussion. It's not a 1-minute discussion today. That's part of a multi-year discussion that's going on. And therefore, the ability to offer critical observation, that sales manager is well positioned to be able to be present and to be contextually aware of what's going on for that particular rep and be able to offer critical observation and recommendations. But I think it's very important that cadence is directly related to the job function. In marketing, I can tell you right now, if I am, inquiring of my VP of marketing daily, I'm doing a disservice to her. Absolutely. They need time to put together their strategy. They need time to implement their strategy. They need time to measure the impact and feedback. They need time to do the creative work. They need time to implement all the data analysis that goes into campaign management for lead generation. It's a different cadence. And furthermore, with customer success teams, it's the same thing. It's the cadence. The cadence that you work with them is not going to be the same as reps. And I think if you look across the go-to-market teams, whether it's solutions architects, whether it's customer success managers, alliance managers in the partner ecosystem, business development reps and marketing or sales reps, they all require a different cadence. And it's understanding what are those first line managers for those teams? What is the cadence that they're going to practice with their teammates?
You mentioned that frontline managers, effective frontline managers, one of the common threads is that their regular interaction with their team in order to drive results. Give me a couple of other common threads that you see in frontline managers that, and leaders in general, I suppose, that you see in some of the best people.
They know their business like the back of their hand. They don't need to prepare to give you the update on their business by numbers, by qualitative and quantitative information. They also know the members of their team well. They don't need to be reminded that a member of their team is on vacation in a particular day. And furthermore, they can fill in for a member of their team at a moment's notice and provide similar or better quality. Those are the 3 traits that I see. Those are the 3 behaviors that I see. Now, I found that I mentioned these leadership principles that I have developed over the years. It was rooted in making those sorts of observations. People who have, high quality of standards, people who have a bias for action, people who like to inspire others, people who lead from the front, people who are always curious and trying to learn and get better. So it was rooted in those observations.
You mentioned high quality for, what was that? High standard for quality. Is that what you said? What's one of them?
To have very high standards when it comes to quality.
How does that manifest itself one way or another when you're meeting someone, maybe even for the first time?
Well,
and I know obviously that can be difficult because there's so many different variables, but I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
But I think it's really important. You added the phrase, especially the first time you meet an individual. Trying to understand where another person is coming from is very important. And setting that as an example of a standard is important. So I have too often witnessed brilliant people in a first meeting talk 85% of the time. They may walk away from that meeting not having any awareness about what the other person needed from the meeting, why the other person decided to invest time in the meeting. And that's an example of having high standards when it comes to quality, even those initial interactions. I think it was Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What's the first habit? Seek first to understand. And I think making sure the individuals do that, but I think how it manifests itself in other areas are, for a sales manager, making sure that those proposals are consistent and absent of errors. When it comes to a customer success manager, making sure that the calculation for the business case realized by a customer is one that's accurate and can be attributable and shared by the customer internally within their organization to socialize, the success and the delight that they've experienced from the product. And in marketing, it can be demonstrated with all of the content that's being used across the organization is one of a similar look and feel and message. So I think in various departments, it takes on various different forms. But I think it all comes down to the fact of there should be fewer surprises, and there should be the expectation that we should look for ways to make it better, whatever the it is at that moment.
Right, that makes sense. What about individual contributors in terms of sales? There's a lot of individual contributor salespeople that listen to this podcast, and one of the things I always try to promise to them is that we'll get a sense of what the Gregg Carmans of the world are thinking when they get to maybe the final round of interviews with the CRO. What are some of those traits or behaviors that you see that get you excited to say, man, we need this person in our organization somehow? Well, even if we don't have the spot, we'll add one for this person. What gets you excited?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that by the time you get to that level in the interview process, we know that you're competent enough to do the job. It's all about fit and behavior. The second thing is realize that you started interviewing the moment you submitted your application or had your first interaction with the company. You don't stop interviewing until you have signed your offer letter. It's not over until that moment. You are constantly interviewing, especially as an individual sales rep. You are being measured on your sales capability, how you sell yourself throughout the interview process. If this is how you behave, then this is how you're going to behave with customers. Take, for example, are you coachable? What if a customer gives you critical feedback and you respond that way? You respond negatively. That's what we don't want. We need to avoid that. I think the fourth thing to take into consideration is most organizations want individuals that are really excited to work there. Know what the company is doing. Know what it's trying to accomplish. Know the most recent news. You don't have to recite it, but be excited about the knowledge of those facts. All right. When most CROs will say, hey, so tell me, what do you know about us? They're not expecting an accurate answer. They want to know, what do you know, so that they can help you fill in the gaps. That should be a knowledgeable answer, and one that's filled with excitement and curiosity, and one that's filled with, I want to be part of the team. All right. The fifth thing that we look at is behaviors that tell us that you will perform. Do you listen more than you speak? That's one. When you speak, are you articulate, or do you speak in non sequiturs? So are you a good communicator? I often make sure that by the time they get to me, I want proof that they're a good communicator, verbally and written. I want to make sure of that. Lastly, do they have, what's their capability when it comes to math and using spreadsheets? As a sales rep, I'll tell you, I've seen it all too often. The best individual contributors can do the math for a customer on a deal in their head with confidence and accuracy, because they know the importance of being able to answer the customer's question on the impact of changing the scope of a deal and what that would mean economically. They know the importance of answering that question rapidly versus having to go back and figure it out and coming back to the customer. Every bit of additional time you put into a deal, you're adding incremental risk. So being able to have some math quantitative capability. And then the last thing, which is totally subjective, but I could tell you a lot of CROs do it, is this someone that I will enjoy working with? And why do they put that filter on it? Because they often, a lot of us CROs put ourselves in the seat of the customer. Will the customer want to speak with this person again?
Right. I heard it also described as the like the airport test, right? In other words, if we were stranded at an airport for, a couple of hours because there was a delay in flight, could I see myself, with this person or having a drink with them for an extra, however long while we wait for our flight,
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I had a guy who used to be the president of one of the four largest software companies in the world, and he used to say, is this somebody I want to have dinner with? Mm-hmm. Or am I always going to say no? And, yeah, right. and he would put that test right before he would approve an offer or not. And I think, my view, that's a little too extreme, but that was his view and it worked for him.
I love that. I think that's great. It is important. One of the things that you mentioned, which to me I find fascinating. I've interviewed a lot of people doing this podcast online, and frankly, just the conversations that I have privately with my clients. And I've never heard this about the math, being able to put together, understand the value of a deal to a customer and the financial implications, so to speak, on a fly. Is that something that you test for, like literally like a cognitive test during the interview process? Is it something that you have some sort of a case study? Is it some sort of during the presentation? How can that come out?
I have not found an effective, non-burdensome way to evaluate for that, with the exception of just references.
Yep.
But I can tell you the absence of it is real painful and obvious. Because let's do a quick walkthrough. Customer says, hey Jay, this $1 million proposal, I can't spend $1 million. And I'm wondering, if I reduce the scope by 20%, can I do this for $800K? You need to be able to know, hey, look, you need to be able to know, what are the implications of reducing scope by 20%? Because it probably isn't a 20% reduction in price.
Right.
All right. But you need to know that and be able to have a fluid, authentic, and natural conversation with the customer. For example, Mr. Customer, I think that if you were to reduce scope by 20%, the impact on the price, it's going to take it down about 7.5%, 8% in price. Well, why is that, Jay? You need to be able to answer. Well, because by reducing it in scope by 20%, you're not getting the volume-based discount on this one particular aspect of the price list. I could still give you a really attractive discount, but it's still based on a higher cost basis. And as you can imagine, the less you spend, the less capability I have to offer you more discounts. But to be able to fluidly navigate that and have the confidence that I know the math, I know the price list, I know the ramifications of this. And it becomes really important if you're an individual rep who is also having to be considerate of margins, which sometimes in hardware or in consumer packaged goods, margins really play a role in this. In software, we have the luxury of not having to measure reps on margin. But in a lot of other industries, you do. And then that becomes a much more complicated exercise. But being conversant and well-educated on the math will serve you well, because it reduces the amount of time you're adding to the cycle, which therefore reduces your risk, because you're able to answer it on the spot, navigate it, and determine if it's a real issue or not.
And you're able, especially in enterprise software, at least you're able to show the business implications of reducing that price as well, because maybe there's less support, let's just say, during implementation. Maybe it takes longer to implement because you don't have, from your end, it's like, yes, we can do it for less, but you might not have the support that you would normally have in those types of things.
That's right. And I've seen the best of the best reps be able to take it one step further and say, look, it's only going to reduce your price by 7.5 or 8%. But I think the bigger question you should be asking, Mr. Customer, is the impact that that's going to have on your business case. By reducing scope 20%, you're going to dilute your business case by like 35%. So what we think is, let's figure out a right balance of cost and benefit and time to that benefit. Maybe it's not spending $1 million. Maybe it's spending something less, but let's not do it and throw away a bunch of benefits you can get. Let's figure out that balance. The best reps are able to finish the sentence with the impact to the customer, not just on spend, but on value.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing too that you said that always fascinates me, and it's one of those things where as I'm evaluating candidates, as you evaluate candidates, it's when you walk away from an interview and you're not excited about them, but they have the skill set. I feel like it always comes down to one of the things that you mentioned, which is communication, like their ability to articulate and to not speak in non sequiturs. And, I smiled when you said that when someone talks, 85% of the time. I had that literal feedback from a client of mine like last week, or 2 weeks ago. And from a candidate's perspective, it's hard because first of all, they don't interview all the time, of course, right? They oftentimes are the ones that are actually asking the questions if they're good reps and they're qualifying an opportunity. By the way, qualifying all the way to the end until it's closed, right? Most of the time, that's all you're doing if you're effective is asking the questions, right? So now all of a sudden the tables are reversed and they think that they're up on stage giving some sort of, presentation or speech, I guess, if you will, and the mindset shifts. So that's one thing in terms of talking too much. So, but when it comes to the non sequiturs and not being able to speak clearly and what I always call the economy of the word, right? Saying, just the right amount of words and getting your point across without saying too much more than that. How can people who are growth minded improve that? Like, where should they go? What have you done in terms of whether it's books, listening to other people speak? Is it just overall experience that you get? Is it just doing things like this and practicing talking publicly? Where does that come from and how can people improve that?
I think the most common book that I've seen help with this is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's the most common book with how to learn the skill that is a skill of reciprocity, which is I need to listen to give you value. I'm probably going to be speaking when I give you value, but I also need to validate that it landed, that it was resonant with you. I think that book is the most common book or tool that I've seen actually help people figure this out. I think the other thing is when it comes to interviewing as an individual sales rep, the best advice I was ever given was, if you're really good as an individual sales rep, when you engage with customers, you got to plan every time. You got to plan every time. And you know what you're selling, and you know the value, and you know the impact to the customer. And you're always, like you said, qualifying. You need to do the same when you're selling yourself in an interview process. Don't get sloppy. And that means don't talk all the time. When somebody asks you a question, answer the question, And then check in. Was that the information you were seeking? And by the way, the last thing is practice. You know, just you got to practice how you're presenting yourself. You got to practice how you're organizing your thoughts. You got to practice the principles of the 7 habits of highly effective people. You got to practice the principles of how to win friends and influence people. But the more you practice, the more it becomes just the authentic nature of who you are. And then the practice becomes less about remembering how to do it. The practice becomes more about, I'm ready. Okay, you know, I'm ready to do this.
Yeah, it becomes a habit, right? At the end,
That's right.
When you do it enough, right? You want to change your behavior. You know, do some things every day. I think it's like 30 days or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And eventually it becomes a habit, and so it's second nature.
Yeah, I think the last thing is don't be afraid to give answers in bite-sized chunks.
Hmm.
You know, it's okay if I answer yes quickly to one of your questions and then ask if that landed with you and then elaborate. It's okay in an interview process to do that. Do you have experience doing this? Yes, I do. I'm happy to provide more if you'd like. No, that's enough for now. I think actually there's one more thing in the interview process that's a really important thing for individual sales reps to remember, because you follow this principle when you're selling your product. Don't forget you're selling yourself, you're the product, and that is don't sell past yes. Don't sell past yes.
Yeah.
Never seen it work out well.
Nah, that's why I'm smiling. It's just, it's funny. I'm smiling because I see my wife do it with my kids too often. I'm like, no, they just said they wanted the pizza. What are you doing? Why are you throwing another option in there? Why do you keep going? That's it. Let's move on. Let's order the food.
In my house, I'm the one that makes those mistakes with our kids. You know, I get sloppy in my house. My daughters remind me all the time. So.
It's so funny. I love it. All right, we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of yours. So let's get into well, just really quickly, speaking of a yes or no question, are you hiring, and how can people get in touch with you if you are hiring?
Yes, we're hiring a VP of product and a VP of sales right now.
Okay. And well, actually, we'll get your contact information at the very end in terms of how people can reach you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start. Are you ready for what I call the rapid fire 5, which is just 5 questions that I'd like to ask you, and people can get to know you a little bit through those answers. All right, fantastic. Yeah. What are you most excited about right now, either personally or professionally?
You know, I think professionally, I'm most excited about tools and applications and automation that can help distributed go-to-market teams have one place to run their go-to-market strategies from. I'm most excited about breakthroughs in that in the coming years.
What activity do you miss most since the pandemic arrived?
Group dinners.
What do you want to get better at right now?
There are a lot of things, Jay.
A whole nother episode.
There are a lot of things. You know, I think having a consistent work schedule, knowing that working from home is going to be the standard for most, if not all, of 2021. So trying to instill best practices there or something I'm working on.
I thought you were going to say guitar, but I guess not.
Well, guitar too. I'm trying to do the guitar thing. There's so many things. Eat better, you know.
Right. Pick one, right?
Yeah.
Well, with that said, then what keeps you motivated?
You know, what keeps me motivated always it's where everybody has different motivators, but for me, it's my kids. You know, I like to think that when my kids hear me working, and when my kids see me, you know, working with teammates or investors or customers, that they're not only proud of what I'm doing, but they're taking on some of those habits themselves. And I know the importance of learning through osmosis in those environments. And I think with work from home, it's like amplified.
Yeah, it's interesting. From the time my daughter was 3, she's 7 now. My son is 5. I used to say, I never used to call it work. I always say I'm going to help people. And, you know,
That's good. I like that.
There was a Zig Ziglar book that I read. It was probably one of my first sales books. I forget what it was called. forget what it was called, See You at the Top maybe, but it said something to the effect of, as long as you can help enough people get what they want, you can have anything that you want, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a mantra that I've just repeated to them from the beginning. So when I come up here in my office, like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm going to help more people. People need my help. I'm going to help more people.
I love it. You know, I think magic words that I think open so many doors are, how can I help you?
Yeah, right. That's right. Absolutely. One other question here for you on the fifth question for those who are keeping score at home. Can you share a piece of advice or tool that you use to help you stay productive?
You know, I think for me, and this goes more towards managers and leaders, I block off certain times of the day where I can get, you know, my administrative work done or my time with my family accomplished, because I realize, especially in this work from home environment, there are predictable and concentrated periods of the day, 4, 5, 6 hours each day, where your teams need you. And it goes back to being present. And I find that blocking off time early in the day to do emails, blocking off 15 minutes in the middle of the day to get caught up with emails, and blocking off 30 minutes at the end of the day to wrap up with emails is really important, so that you're not always multitasking, so that you can be present for those 4 to 6 hours during the middle of the day when your teammates need you. And that has helped me a lot, because it frees me from feeling like I constantly have to be available, because it makes me present when I'm needed to be available.
Let me ask you a follow-up question to that really quickly. Do you close the application, like the email application, so you're not even getting notifications on your desktop or phone if you're doing that?
No, but when I first started the habit, I did.
Yeah, me too.
So now I don't. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I'm more used to not feeling the pressure. Maybe I've developed that habit.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
I minimize them, but I don't exit them.
Yep. Okay. And then the final question is going back to what you were saying about the VP of Sales and VP of Marketing, is how can folks reach out to you, contact you, inquire about those in particular, or just to follow up to say thank you and perhaps maybe follow up on one of the questions that I have?
So it's a VP of Product and VP of Sales. And the best way to do it, you can send an email to Gregg with 2 G's at Humanyze, HUMANYZE.com. Or you can send an email to jobs@humanyze.com.
Fantastic. Gregg Carman, Gregg with 2 G's, Carman with an A. Thank you for going over quota today.
Jay, I really appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.
Goodbye, everyone. I'm cueing the music.